Lines episode 2. Super excited for today's show. We're going to be breaking down, obviously, the Israeli and Hamas conflicts in the Middle East, talk about how it's going to affect the oil basin, moving into just the geopolitical tensions around the U.S. having to ramp up the military in the Middle East. Moving on, of course, to RFK and someone on this stream who has been calling him out, and then as well as leading into the House Speakership, American protests, and so much more today. So, guys, welcome in. Samuel, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you here today, man.
Yeah, awesome. So I think the first thing we're going to cover is Israel and Palestine. And we're going to try to break that into chunks because if you guys haven't noticed, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has completely sucked all the air out of the media cycle practically every day. And there's multiple reasons for that. And it's pretty interesting. And kind of like I did a previous video on Israel and Palestine. And our goal, I don't think, is to drive into the emotion. So we're going to be kind of heartless. And just instead of talking about, people dying, which we all know is terrible, and we all know that's going on, war is bad, et cetera, like we want to look at the implications and we want to figure out, okay, like what is actually going to happen now? Because we've had an unprecedented attack by Hamas. There's so much news, misinformation, malinformation, and just straight up disinformation coming from all kinds of different parties. So I think the first thing that I want to just briefly touch on is this Israeli-Palestinian conflict is going to absolutely change our entire Middle East policy, and it already has. So the previous Trump administration was working on essentially making Israel safe and secure and getting along with all the Arab nations, right? You had deals between Israel and Egypt, deals between Israel and Jordan, deals between Israel and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, all lining up during the Trump admin. That was all continued through the Biden admin. But then we had the Ukraine war. Now, there's more evidence that Russia is deeply involved in at least funding Hamas through Iran or through training some of these people. Because the most fascinating thing is this is not a typical Hamas attack. It wasn't just a rocket here or two. Like, it was advanced. They went in, they grabbed as many hostages as possible to make sure that Israel couldn't just flatten it, right? Because they're not going to kill their own people. And so now the strategy is, and you're seeing this happen in real time, all of America's resources are being sucked away from Ukraine. This is just as Russia continued and essentially encircled a city that we've been fighting them over for the past 2-3 months. We've sucked all the energy out of Ukraine. Now it's all dedicated toward Israel. So that's why Israel and Palestine is one of those pressure points. The scary thing is now we're in Europe, we're in the Middle East. All you need is for something to happen in Asia. And I'm not saying it could be Taiwan because there's so many inflection points in Asia. Taiwan's the biggest one we think of because we're American. But you still have the North and South Korea border. You have things on the Senkaku Islands in Japan. You have what's going on in the Philippines. So we've moved aircraft carriers from Asia and from the Atlantic now, all getting closer toward Israel. So those are resources. So that's like a very real world example of literally American resources being moved. So the broader picture is the geopolitical one, right? And so I want you to keep that in mind the whole rest of the conversation we have, because you're seeing emotion, you're seeing people die. People in DC and in Russia are all using okay, what now? We have a tragedy, we have the media marketing, but we can't forget, we want to maintain balance and order or use this to our advantage.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the broader picture here, right? We're separating the religion and state out of this and looking at the defense pact that just came through. I mean, we're on the verge of one of the biggest geopolitical agreements in the last 5 decades at this point between Israel, the Saudis, and of course the United States. And it was specifically meant towards giving Saudi Arabia more American weapons, access to a civilian nuclear program, and looking at having Riyadh look at Israel as its own sovereign nation. And so this is a huge political moment that will be this hasn't changed, right? The talks have definitely been dwarfed by this. And what I'm watching right now is obviously Zelensky from Ukraine. He's kind of going door to door right now, right? He's trying to pull the attention back to Ukraine as Russia is doing their own things, which is impacting Israel as well. So, we're at this moment where we're 3 months away from BRICS with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia. Iran's involved with that, I believe, as well. You have Argentina, and then I think the UAE looking to join as soon as January 1st of 2024. Now, BRICS to me is really a nothing burger on the grand schemes of things, but I do believe it makes sense from a geopolitical perspective for them to utilize this in the negotiations to get that civilian program, the nukes that they want, and then the most important, which is the American weaponry or weaponry. Can't speak today, but the reason for that is going to be, a lot of people believe that the U.S. dollar is reliant on being backed by petro, which does have a huge tie into the reason on where we're at today, why it's valued at the reason it is. But the majority of the actual value is going to come from us having the largest navy in the world, allowing for that global trade. We have that global security. And Saudi Arabia specifically has a lot of borders or conflicts on their borders. Iran funds the Hezbollah. They fund the Hamas. They are also involved with Iraq and what's going on in Yemen. And so they have all of this conflict taking place. A lot of the agreements we make with Saudi Arabia specifically come for the security. They want the security of and from Americans. They want our weapons. And so, this is a moment where we have to pay attention to what our politicians are deciding to do. And you're seeing it on the charts, specifically in commodities like oil, because you have people like Lindsey Graham or candidates like Nikki Haley coming out and just advocating for the complete demolition of Iran now, which there isn't even evidence yet that they have supported these groups. We know that they fund them, but having a direct involvement with the logistics of this invasion of the Hamas into Israel, if we were to progress and the military industrial complex gets their way with bombing, for example, oil refineries in Iran, this could be detrimental to inflation in the United States and the broader exports of the Strait of Hormuz. And so that is kind of the focus right here, what we're trying to watch as it ramps up. We know this war is not ending anytime soon. You had obviously Israel come out today and Benjamin literally speak and say that this is just the beginning. They're moving 1.1 million people in Gaza right now to the southern border and telling them to evacuate. They're displacing millions of people at this point, and that's nothing about this is going to go smooth. And they're going to come in and completely, with an in-ground invasion, demolish the northern side of Gaza. And so, with these tensions, we have to pay attention to the surrounding countries. And that's going to be importantly Lebanon, which I believe Israel just bombed two airfields, their two largest airports this morning or was last night. And then obviously what's going to take place with Iran, Egypt, and if they end up actually backing the Palestinians, but more importantly the Hamas. Because again, we got to distinct the two because between the Hamas and Palestinians. Which a lot of people don't want to do. So,
and you have to understand, every time a situation like this happens, you need to ask why now, right? Nothing is by accident. And so a lot of people are theorizing, okay, they invaded because it was a holiday. It was the 50th anniversary of another Palestinian attack on Israel and stuff like that. But if these people in Palestine, if these leaders are talking to Iran, talking to Russia, talking to, I even say we don't know yet, but could be North Korea involved, could be China involved. We just don't know. China's been trying to play very even-handed, but frankly, they've been kind of taking more the side of the Arab nations, and that's kind of where they're placing their bets. I think they're being far more friendly on that. Absolutely. So you have to ask why now, and I think there's a bunch of strategy around stretching the U.S.'s resources thin. I can't misunderstate how if we even attack Iran, how screwed we are around the world, because that is going to be such an intense and costly war that Iran has been prepping for, that it would take all the resources out of Ukraine. You can guarantee that China is going to be backing Iran, and that would become a huge proxy war that would just essentially destroy the entire Middle East. So whether you think Iran's good or not, the time to attack and deal with Iran was way too long ago, right? So unless we're ready to literally nuke them, which hopefully isn't going to happen because that won't turn out well for anybody, you're kind of stuck with dealing with them in a peculiar way, which is, I think, why Obama was trying the approach that he did with the Iran nuclear deal. And even Trump, he seemed to have handled Iran better than our current administration. I don't know what Biden's doing now, because he literally paid them money to then just funnel to this current crisis that's going on now. So one interesting note is you should note the activation, I should say, or the use case of propaganda on both sides. And
Which
that's why,
I do want to say with the 6 billion, they did end up freezing it again today, so that hasn't been spent yet. But that
sure,
definitely is fungible. Could have reallocated resources, but we just don't have the evidence yet.
correct. And that's not the first time that we've given them money either, right? So it's kind of just that can be a symbolic sign that we're willing to just give money away, right, to people who we not necessarily align with. And that's why geopolitics kind of gets fuzzy, is because the US has for a long time actually wanted to have a relationship with Iran and vice versa, but we kind of screwed all that up in the 50s and the 60s, and it is what it is. At one time, we viewed Iran hopefully being the policeman of the Middle East, and now they're our enemy, and those dreams seem to be dead. But look out for the propaganda, because it's fascinating how quickly a story can be published to Twitter, images can be published, and then you will find a Wikipedia page citing all kinds of sources, locking it in and making it official before you know anything's verified, because it's all fed off of emotion and tragedy, which is fine. But in a war zone, you really don't know. I saw an article on a newspaper the other day with a headline that would make you think what you're looking at was a population of one type, but then under the footnote, it was the opposite population, right? So you're assuming the headline that you're looking at is associated with the picture that you're looking at, but they're two completely separate things, and it has to do with this conflict, right? So propaganda is in full swing. It's very interesting to watch, because you're seeing how it's used, how it's engaged, how people retweet, how people share articles, how they quote each other, how one story that no one's verified by a single account on Twitter can then become fact overnight and be used on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times all at once.
Yeah, and I mean, you see the propaganda working. I think the best like example of this is the protest right now with people standing up for the Hamas, which is a blatant terrorist organization that resembles all the way back to the Muslim Brotherhood. Like there's no argument against this. The United Nations looks at them like this, and Iran funds them for these purposes. And so, the greatest example is seeing right now. It blows my mind that we're even watching this take place, but is the LGBTQ community actually supporting them and like raising swastikas? And you guys can see this is happening in the United States right now. And I don't know if it was in New York where I saw the actual guys holding up the like phones with swastikas within them, supporting these guys. It's dude, the Hamas literally slaughtered people for being gay. Like you can't. That's not even an outlook. So supporting that narrative just shows that a lot of the media has brainwashed a lot of people in the states, and I don't think it's necessary. I don't blame these people. I mean, again, you're saying watch out for the propaganda, but people right now in the states, I feel like have nothing to like grasp onto. They're all looking for a community. They're all looking for the next fight. They have no self identity, and so the propaganda is super easy to push through the states right now. And globally, so I completely agree. You got to watch for the propaganda. There's been so. Did you see CNN fake the like bombing attack?
Yeah, yeah.
Like the amount is the you. I don't know how people just continue to trust mainstream media. It every single day or every single week we catch them doing another BS, fear mongering tactic. It's all about fear mongering, right? Fear brings the views in. If you look
Yep.
at, I just saw a great article on crime rates in the United States. If you ask anybody today, they're going to say we're at the most dangerous point in our history. If Jamie Dimon just came out, the CEO of JP Morgan, today we're at the most dangerous point in the last 4 decades in America, based on all the conflicts. And while that might be true to an extent for the Americans that are saying that they don't feel safer than ever in a lot of these neighborhoods. Crime rates are at a historical low comparison to how many people are alive today. People are living longer. And if you look at the data, right, if we look at the data and the statistics, it shows those things are on a decline. But because of the propaganda and social media and the way that the media specifically, this is TikTok, this is YouTube, this is everything. It's even when I post videos, right? It's if you're not talking about something that injects fear into your audience, it's not going to go viral. And these algorithms, they incentivize that because the people that watch are engaged based off fear are bringing in more views to, even if it is propaganda, which is going to bring more views to their advertisements. And so the whole model and structure and system of propaganda incentivizes to fear monger. And it's a very interesting outlook.
Yeah, I think for the universities, the one thing people have to understand is, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine who I met in university, and she's Palestinian and has been very, anti-Israel and all my life and stuff like that. So I was talking to her a little bit. I was like, "Hey, I just had a few questions for you. Wanted to get some political anecdotal evidence because, to be honest, anecdotal evidence, if you ask like different people within your group, as long as you're not in a bubble, can be very useful." And so I asked her, I was like, "Well, who'd you vote for, Biden or Trump?" She told me she voted for Biden. So now I told her, I was like, okay, well, based off of what Biden's doing right now, how does that affect how you're going to vote? And she essentially was like, well, I don't like either of them. Right. But I'm like, okay, but in 2024, how are you going to vote? And she's like, well, I'd still vote for Biden. Right. So, from the Democratic point of view, strategically, and everyone does this, you calculate how much they hate the other side and what you can get away with. So all those people who are protesting, who are saying Biden, you suck, or pro Hamas, I guarantee you the majority of them are still going to vote for Biden over a Trump if that's how the election goes. Although certainly vote for a Biden over DeSantis. Further, the same people who fund Biden also funded these universities to be teaching the things that they're teaching these people to have the opinions that they have, right? Will that stop them from funding these programs? I don't think so, right? Because they know they can pigeonhole you strategically and that you're still going to do what they want, even if you don't like the current thing now,
Yeah.
right? So we look at it as rational people, meaning you can never think rationally, right? When you're thinking about politics, you have to say, okay, what would an irrational purpose, like if there's things that don't add up and conflict, rational mind says, okay, something has to trump the other. Irrational mind says, well, I can believe in both, right? And so you have to remember that these people marching who say, oh, Hamas is great and they're a part of the LGBTQ plus community, they're not concerned with, the Muslim countries where being gay is banned, right? They're more concerned with this overarching theme of oppression, decolonization, colonialism, and that everything is a representation of the big guy coming after the little man, right? And they view Hamas as the little guy. And if you're an LGBTQ plus, even though if you go to Saudi Arabia, you might get killed, right? Or you might get like subjected to all kinds of terrible stuff. As long as you're the little guy, you're on each other's side, and they unite over those facts. So you look and you go, okay, well that doesn't make sense to me, right? Because those two things
It's
don't
not
add
logical.
up.
It's
But in
not
their minds, they do. And that's why oftentimes people are so bad at reading political momentum and outlooks and elections because they think, well, rationally, this has to be happening. I'm seeing these people come out and say, Biden, you suck. I'm pro Hamas. So Biden's definitely going to lose the election. But it's like, no, those people will probably still vote for Biden. You have to understand that because at the end of the day, they're going to go, well, I hate them
see it in
both.
the media too, because they talk about how Benjamin Netanyahu is a Trump-like figure, right? So even the Democratic ran media is already portraying what's happening in Israel and the policies that have been taking place since, by the way, 1917. Like this is the things that are taking place today is it goes back. It's a historical moment, right? This is a movement has been multiple wars and conflicts for a century at this point. Yet the media is portraying it as this is a Trump-like figure, right? If Trump is elected, he's going to do the same thing to Chicago. He's going to do the same thing to New York, right? He's going to do the same thing to Democrats. These MAGA Republicans, they're alt-right figures. These are, neo-Nazis, right? And it doesn't help that we have candidates like Nikki Haley being propped up by the media. Won't lie, but so I 100% agree.
You want to take a minute and trash on her?
I would love to. Tucker's done a great job this week, and a lot of people have been like, "Wow, Tucker." Well, I'm agreeing with Tucker Carlson. You even get people from the other side being like, "Dude, it's the this is another tactic of propaganda. Is another tactic of fear mongering." And Nikki Haley, the only thing she's good at is fear mongering. This is somebody who's on the board of Raytheon and I might have been Lockheed Martin, but as well as Boeing, and she's making millions off just conflicts and foreign chaos. She makes millions off both sides because the same companies get the government contracts for the interceptors in Israel. She's out lobbying to Iran. This is the definition of a chaotic individual that profits Her entire analysis of everything she does, every ounce of money she's made in her career comes from war. It comes from the deaths of innocent people. And so, there's no other way to put that around. She's going to say, "Oh, I'm doing this for America and I'm pro patriotic, whatever it is. These are bad people. These are terrorists." But you can't come out and, like, we have a candidate that is running for the U.S. presidency, and she's coming out and saying, "Finish them," right? To the Hamas, this organization. The problem with saying that and incentivizing that means leveling Gaza. It means thousands of kids, thousands of families, thousands of neighbors, these friends, families, innocent individuals that were born into chaos because of the evils that took place over the last century. Whether it doesn't matter your religious beliefs or not, there are innocent people involved with this. She wants to blow them off this earth. She is, again, I think she is a modern day Hitler, and she profiteers off war. That is who she is.
The interesting thing to note, and once again, you always want to think big picture. What you're seeing is on both the Democratic and Republican side, you have war factions and anti-war factions. Democrats have pro-war factions, and Republicans have pro-war factions. And you're continuing to see each side jostle because at some point when Trump was president, his big thing was no new wars, right? But traditionally, Republicans are the ones for war. That was what George Bush was all about. Obama was supposed to stop that. He didn't. And now Biden has us back in more wars, right? But then you have, and so you want to say, well, Republicans aren't for war, but then you have Nikki Haley, you have Lindsey Graham, you have Chris Christie, you have Tim Scott, all who are pro-war Republicans, right? So you see this divide, and it's interesting to see that split within both parties because definitely the younger generation like us, especially whether you're Democrat or Republican, by far is anti-war, right? And the most interesting to note, and I love how Tucker brings this up, is look at the incentives of people who are actually looking to go to war. Lindsey Graham is old and he has no kids, right? It's not his kids who are going to be going to war. The question everyone needs to ask anytime they want to advocate for war is how many American lives are worth the current situation, right? Are 50,000 Americans dead worth saving what we want to save, whether that's in the Middle East, South America, or Asia? Right? Ask yourself that of Taiwan. How important is Taiwan? Is Taiwan worth 1 million American lives? Is it worth 10 million American lives? Right? Because if you're not doing that thinking, then you're really not dissecting what it means to go to war. Because at the end of the day, it's going to have Americans dying for whatever the cause is. And it's okay if you view it's a cause worth Americans dying for. We have to come to terms. How many Americans is that? Is it all Americans? Right? And what about Americans you know? Or do you feel so safe in your little safe haven that you just know it won't be anyone in your circle?
Yeah. Well, and it comes down to, this is where we're heading as a nation, is the United States is becoming less and less of a world babysitter. I mean, to put it quite frankly, we got to do what's best for us. And a lot of these cases, so the oil bays in the Persian Gulf, what's taking place in the Middle East right now, a lot of this is going to fall. I mean, you got to watch wheat, certain commodities, which is primarily out of Ukraine. But the oil, the Strait of Hormuz, a lot of the oil that is created there is the only reason why we're actually tapping into the oil in the Middle East. We have so much in the United States geographically, we just don't want to do it because there's this huge hoax around climate change. You have the far right MAGA that believe that climate change is a complete, utter myth and want to completely just disregard Monsanto spraying pesticides into our agriculture and soil and ruining our farms in the United States, which has surrounding impacts on our environments and climate. And then you have the far left, which is utilizing it to pass things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which somehow people prop up as Biden is this, environmentalist. He is going to tax the rich, yet it does the complete opposite and incentivizes the 1% and wealthy and elitists to access a market that regular people like me and you can't with the carbon credit system through 45Q, which tripled the incentivization, the subsidiaries, and the tax write-offs for these massive companies like Monsanto. And so when you have this incredible imbalance, like nobody wants to meet within that middle, and it's again doing exactly what you're saying with the propaganda. It's either one side or the other. You can't play both. You can't compromise. You can't think with logic. It's what's the irrational thing to do here. And in the case of candidacy, they're going to be completely pro or completely against. They're not going to be here to compromise. We haven't seen that I don't think I've seen that ever in my lifetime where I've seen two politicians go, you know what? What's the middle ground here, right? That's not, especially since 2016, Trump changed the landscape for politics forever. It's never going to go back to the same. You now see Matt Gaetz using the similar tactics, causing chaos in the House just because it's a genius political marketing tactic, but to elevate his status in just his political career, and which we'll get to in just a second with Jim Jordan. So you know, yeah, I'd have to say you have to zoom out for a second. Look at what's impacting the Middle East. Who's profiting off this, and how is this going to affect us in the future? So whether or not Lindsey Graham, I don't think we're ever going to go that far to that war. But and like you said, it's both sides. You have Hillary Clinton with the Clinton family that's been a part of Benghazi and incentivizing war for years. You had Biden, which completely, by the way, flipped guys. He's the one that pulled our troops out of Afghanistan, but in like 2014 was saying how it didn't make sense, and there's literally an entire recording and speech of him talking about how it would take a year to pull troops out, that it doesn't make sense, that we would leave billions and billions of dollars of equipment behind that would only fall into the hands of terrorist groups, right? So there is someone behind this that you don't have the clear evidence of, but we know is the military industrial complex, because this is something that continues to allow us to profit and lobby for, and you got massive government contracts going into supplying this weaponry. And of course, a lot of your politicians sitting on these committees, profiting off that, and they need conflict, they need war. Now, this is where you also have to realize that war is going to always exist. But you also have to think, okay, what benefits this? Who does this benefit? Right? Is this benefiting the United States? Look at liquefied natural gas, right? Liquid financial gas, LNG is pumping massively. Commodities are going to continue to run. But then you have to also realize, okay, you have China, you have Russia, you have Ukraine, you have all these conflicts taking place. And in my opinion, you have the Belt and Road Initiative, right? That is running right through the Middle East, right up through Ukraine, and they want to get access to Poland. So this also goes to, this is oddly timed. We were about to pass a defense pact with Saudi Arabia and Israel, which would be a historical moment for Riyadh, focusing on Israel as a state. Okay, so if this is happening, and by the way, it was like 50 years identical, like right after, so 1973 was when we had the Oil Embargo Act. This happened 50 years to that date. And so you're just starting to realize, okay, well, who's this going to benefit? Are we trying to stop the Belt and Road Initiative because we're looking at a demographic factor that in 5 to 10 years is going to force China into economic devastation with the real estate sector? And we're playing this game of tug of war, where it's like, okay, all we got to do is hold on for a certain amount of time because they're losing strength. And is conflict in this Middle East going to refrain them from getting their initiatives across with things like the Belt and Road Initiative? So who on the back end on top of that, you actually talk about this all the time, is, okay, what's the game theory? What's the 5-6 year outlook? Because everything that's happening today in the Middle East isn't, yes, there's a lot of serious conflicts, a serious evil that takes place today, but you're thinking from a short-term perspective on a geopolitical decision that's going to impact us 5 to 6 years down the line. So, yeah, I mean, we can either move into the next topic, or we can keep running down this. But
let's talk about. We'll move to Speaker of the House, but I'll finish off with 2 points. One, apparently some of these Hamas people have M4s, and so there is evidence that some of the weapons that we left behind in Afghanistan have made their way over into this conflict. So how awesome is that? Not. And one thing you need to keep note is the Arab world is very focused on the Palestinian conflict, even if the leaders aren't. So now leaders are going to be forced to make decisions based on what the populace says, otherwise be at risk of being overthrown. So this could be an Arab Spring 2.0 if it's not handled correctly. So you're going to have a lot of Egyptians, a lot of Jordanians. I think in Jordan they had upwards of 100,000 people in the street. That is a lot of angry people that if they can't direct their anger at Israel, they're going to direct it at the king. Right. And that goes for Saudi Arabia, that goes for Qatar, that goes for Turkey. So these leaders are now going to be in a tight position to where, okay, how do I keep my people happy and not get involved in war too? Right. So very fine line to balance. But it is interesting that all this is going on while the U.S. House currently isn't functioning because there is no speaker. So no bills can pass. I thought Steve Scalise had it on lock as of a day ago, but he just pulled out because he didn't have enough votes.
Yeah.
You need 217 votes.
Because of the same group, right? I think it was because of the same group of GOP that kicked out.
Yes, because you need, because you're not going to have any Democrats voting for the speaker, right? You're going to get no Democratic votes, even though they could. They're just not going to. They're always going to vote no. So it's only the Republicans who can vote. So they have to be completely united give or take like 5 votes, right? So they have like the swing of like 5 to 8. And so a lot of people have a lot of power. So I saw Scalise didn't make it because something happened. Scalise was gaining momentum. Scalise was close with McCarthy. So my assumption was Scalise is the McCarthy pick. Then what happens is Scalise comes out and says, okay, people I called 3 days ago who were going to tell me yes are now reneging and saying, no, not going to happen. So that tells me that either the Matt Gaetz or the Trump or the Jim Jordan, whoever was behind it, was very successful in convincing certain people who I have no idea who they are, but there's some power play going on behind the scenes, jockeying behind who that is, and they didn't want Scalise in there. It's probably Matt Gaetz, but I have no clue. So now Jim Jordan's going to be up for a vote, but now you have like 2 people in the House Republicans who are only voting for McCarthy. So they're just like, screw you guys. And they're going to have Scalise people who are like, no, we're not voting for Jordan. Jordan is very close to Trump. He's a Freedom Caucus guy, so he would definitely be in the Matt Gaetz era of politician. So what else do you have left? It's very possible that Kevin McCarthy gets renominated. I think that's an option. I think that could happen. I think people could try to just start enacting revenge, but all that matters is as long as there's no House Speaker, how are we going to keep funding the government? They have till November, or it was like what, 60 days, 45 days, 45 days. So that's going to be coming up here soon. And so, to be honest, it's very fun to watch. It's very fun to watch the political jockeying. Trump pulled out. I really thought Trump might go in there. And there's still that possibility because, for all I know, if they just can't land, they might be like, okay, it's political suicide if we don't vote for Trump, right, as speaker. That's so far-fetched, even though that would be so hilarious and so fun for that to happen because it makes things even crazier than they already are. But if they can't land on anybody, what other option do you have left? And maybe they don't do Trump. Imagine if they're like, we're going to nominate Vivek Ramaswamy. You know what I mean? Like,
That'd be awful.
they could technically nominate anybody. And just like Gavin Newsom picked someone who's not a politician, who is a big fundraiser, they could pick someone who's heavy in political circles. Imagine if they picked Tucker Carlson, right? Said, hey, are you going to be speaker? You know, that's never going to happen, but they have to get something done.
Yeah, no, but the question is, how long can they hold this off for? And what are they holding off for? So who's this going to impact the most? What bills are trying to be passed through the House right now that are getting stalled because there's no speaker to run through the system? So, which actually, if you have any insight on that, any bills that you think are correlated to this, anything that was trying to get passed through?
No, I think the biggest one was funding, which is Israeli stuff ramps it all up. This puts pressure on the people who want to freeze government, but it also gives them a huge advantage because now, let's say there's 8 people holding the government hostage on the Speaker of the House stuff. They're going to come under a lot of pressure, and people are going to say, okay, we're going to do everything we can to make sure you're not electable. But if they're in safe districts, the pressure is going to ramp up on everybody else, and they're going to say, well, we're not budging, so what are you going to give us? Otherwise, we're fine with the whole party being screwed, right? Yeah. But we have a while till Election Day, and Americans really don't think more than 2 months out. They really don't. So we have plenty of time for them to screw up the government as much as they want and get what they want before the electorate really cares.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. It's funny you said like 2-month ratio. But hey, really quick, guys, for everybody watching, if you guys are on another live service, guys, come to the YouTube channel. Thank everyone for watching. If you want to watch the rest of this, you do need to come to the YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you guys are following Samuel Arms. Before we hop into this next topic, we do these Beyond the Headlines episodes every single Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys turn on those notifications where we just break down our macros, geopolitical tensions, and policies happening within the United States. So again, thank you on the other services, guys. Come to the YouTube. We'll see you guys in the next episode or in the live stream. We can move on to the talks in Harvard. There's been a huge, and actually this has caused so much controversy. And everything, guys, in today's show, unfortunately, is going to have to relate back to the Israel Hamas conflict. It is causing, every politician and every single media outlet to kind of bounce back and forth because they don't know what they can say about the conflict. They don't know what they shouldn't say about the conflict, and they don't know how they should bring it out about the conflict. And so without being threatened by cancel culture or losing sponsors or advertisements, you have literally celebrities losing their sponsorships, getting kicked off their platforms for being pro-Palestinian. You have people getting kicked off for being pro-Israel. So where can you stand on this issue? And this is now not a bipartisan issue on in terms of well, actually, and I want to say bipartisan. I would say more of a joint decision because a lot of people have been pro-Israel, right, pro-Jewish, and like they play the Holocaust card. And again, I'm not going to go down that path and say that's right or wrong, but the reality is now today that is ramping up so significantly. You're seeing protests, like you mentioned, in Jordan, in Egypt, in the United States, in the UK, all over the world, and it's bringing away a lot of the viewpoints from the Ukraine war, which is why you have Zelensky out here, campaigning for, like I said, going door to door for more fundraising. But this leads us to Harvard now. So universities, which a major perfume company, uh, one of I think it was like her son that was part of this organization, but I believe it was like 36 or 37 organizations. So we're talking hundreds of students standing up against, giving their thoughts and their opinions about this Israeli and Palestinian war. And I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, they were pro-Palestine, right?
I think so.
Okay. So there was a no condemn, and this is where you fall into the gray areas, right? Who are you condemning? Who aren't you condemning? Why are you talking about this conflict but not condemning all of Palestinians? Why aren't you condemning only the Hamas? Like, and this is where this gray area jumps in. It has got people completely, their brains are just smush. And so seeing this at our schools in the United States, seeing this in Harvard, what are your thoughts on this? Is this a just fall under the is this falling under the umbrella of propaganda? Is this being fed through because of the education, the professors, and the who is lobbying these universities and paying for the education? Is it the curriculum? Why is this happening, and why is this happening in the United States?
Well, I think the universities are one of the best ways to see kind of the self destruction and implosion of like Western culture and the ideas that have gotten us this far. And so, yeah, you have these universities who are often funded by these donors who might be, say, pro Israel, but the stuff that they're teaching at these universities is very anti Israel. And so now you have this juxtaposition where, well, you've been funding Harvard for 10, 20 years. You're the reason Harvard is educating students the way they're being educated. You're responsible for the curriculum that's being there, given that you donate to their endowment. So, how can you be surprised at the things that are coming out of Harvard that are atrocious to what you think they should be, right? So, it's kind of back to our previous conversation where it's like we view it as just crazy. Why would you think this way? But these people just, they can have conflicting ideas living in their head and be perfectly fine with it. You know, I have no love for Harvard. I don't care if everyone pulls out of the Harvard endowment. I don't care if Harvard goes bankrupt. In fact, I think that'd be a net positive for
Maybe a net
society.
positive. Yeah.
Yeah, their endowment, by the way, is a huge way to just funnel money, right, from the rich to the richer. The endowment, the way it's taxed, if it's even taxed at all. I mean, they are the epitome of the 1% who pretend to be fighting the 1%, right? But now, because that's the idea, they have all these true believers who are looking at Harvard and going, wait a minute, screw you, right? You are the 1%, even though these are all rich kids, right? Because they got into Harvard.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the system eating itself. And that's why you have to be careful in politics, because what happens is you try to radicalize a certain side in order to get what you want. And you develop these true believers who essentially will always push for your narrative. But as soon as you decide to turn against that narrative yourself, well, you still have these true believers that are getting out of hand. It's the same logic kind of anywhere. I mean, that's what happens. I mean, we will fund terrorist groups overseas, and the goal is the terrorist group will fight. In Afghanistan, they'll fight the Russians. We don't realize, okay, well, we funded them so that when it's our turn to fight them, we're the ones now like in trouble. That logic applies everywhere. And so we make these short-term bets on things that we want, and then in the long term, it just bites us in the ass.
Economic hitman policies. Yeah, yeah. This is for anybody that doesn't know about Ned or obviously the CIA and what they've done, but you can actually relate this to the conflicts with Iran. We destabilized their entire nation when they tried to nationalize their currency and launch their own oil embargo, so to speak. Back in the 1950s, we sponsor coups d'etats all the time in multiple different countries. So that way, the United States can sweep in and absorb their natural resources and indebt these nations into under the World Bank's belt. And it's not just the U.S. People are like, oh, screw the U.S. dollar, screw the U.S. It's like, okay, pick your poison, because you have a democratic country that is going to have a lot better policies, even though they are still ruining. That's the unfortunate reality of this world. That's how capitalism works, right? Like, imagine it, China's doing the same thing with their own policies and absorbing more natural resources, and are literally committing mass genocide in the western province of the Uyghur people. It's like, you have an authoritarian dictatorship that is trying to take all of the totalitarian like figures in this world, whether it's again, Xi Jinping, Putin, Lula in Brazil, multiple people in South Africa. It's like, okay, Iran, some of the worst states out there. You have to, okay, what's the lesser of the two evils, which is why I cover a lot of things about Bitcoin and breaking out of that on my channel. But moving into kind of a more independent analysis, I know you had some thoughts on Kennedy and his candidacy. I don't know if they were actually specified towards him going independent, which unfortunately, I actually do like a lot of his policies. There's a lot that I don't agree on, specifically some of them from the Israeli Palestine perspective. Just because I have a lot of friends that are Palestinian, and I do believe this is a lot more sensitive of a conversation than it needs to be such a slap on the wrist. Hey, here's one state, the other one does not. And it's just so much more complex, because I've spoken to these families, and I'm sure he has too from the Israel standpoint. But what are your thoughts on him? We're moving into now. It's only going to ramp up as we get closer to elections. Coming out with the independent campaign is a massive breakthrough. This is our first pro Bitcoin, anti CIA espionage, anti military industrial complex candidate that has a significant amount of support from the independent sector. Will it be enough to even compete? And is this even a good thing for the American population?
Yeah, so my last video went viral on this. Kennedy is a stupid sellout. I just can't get over how dumb of a decision this is. And so if you're going to vote for Kennedy, I guess it's okay that you're committing a useless
What,
vote, right?
what do you
But
mean
the
by
logic,
a
huh?
stupid sellout? Let's classify stupid sellout.
Oh, classify stupid sellout? Yeah, I'll walk you through this. So, if you were a Kennedy supporter, he's running as a Democrat. Really, he's running against the Biden regime. So, remember previously in this video, we talked about how you have an anti war party and a pro war party. If I were to break it down about just those lines specifically, obviously there's other things that they intersect on and other things that they dissect on. Kennedy is anti-war, Biden is pro-war. So you assume, okay, Kennedy's trying to up a platform to influence Biden and kind of harass the Biden campaign, because one, Biden might not be running for president. There might be a primary, right? Or if there is a primary or an exchange of power, that gives Kennedy an in to essentially say, hey, I'm running. You should allow me to be accepted into the party. He's running as a Democrat, lifelong Democrat. So the other goal should be not only to harass Biden and change his views, but to open up the democratic system, which the Democratic Party does not at all have a democratic system when it comes to the primary election. They've already decided that they would move the primary process to ensure that Kennedy didn't get any votes. Already talked about not having his name on the ballot. Already weren't allowing him Secret Service to protect himself. So Kennedy, as a candidate, was being very skilled at showing the corruption in the Democratic Party and the Biden administration. If you were supporting Kennedy, you were essentially supporting one of the best vehicles to show what's wrong with our democratic process. And Kennedy's political math, if you could view him as a Bernie Sanders, but almost a better one, in that he was making the Democratic Party pivot on certain things because he was drawing their focus and political capital to his primary candidacy, right? So the big question is, wait, if we are the pro-democracy party, why won't we hear Kennedy out? Why won't Biden give him Secret Service protection, right? Why are we keeping Kennedy from doing these things? Who is this Democrat who's saying, oh, Biden's doing stuff wrong? The problem was, from the beginning, we saw Democrats immediately reject him. We saw all the mainstream Democrats essentially say he was a Republican plant. The Democrats that Kennedy got for votes were blue dog Democrats, Democrats who were labeled as Democrats, but who will often vote for Trump, right? So Kennedy is a person, great guy, very cool message, agree with a lot of his points. Going independent kills any negotiating power that he had, right? Independents do not win in America. There's a mathematical reason for that, and there's also social reasons for that, right? Mathematical, we're a winner take all system. You don't get the votes, then you get none of the votes. We're not a parliament where if you get 3%, you have 3% of your party representation in the government. No, you get zero, right, if you lose. Two, fundraising. He would have had a better chance of fundraising because he could have pulled not just from independents who were primarily fundraising for him. He could have pulled from the few Democratic industries who might have liked him, right? It's all about negotiating power. Being independent, everyone knows he's going to lose. He completely agreed with the narrative that he could have been a Republican plant because he didn't just stick it out as a Democrat. And if his whole goal was to get Biden to change course, well, now he's gone from hurting Biden to helping Biden. Because an independent, he's only going to take votes from Trump because Trump and Kennedy voters overlap more than Biden and Kennedy voters do,
Yeah.
right? So now you're actually helping the guy who you were sworn to try to change and hurting the guy who is also fighting the same enemy as you. So my guess is that as a sellout, he would have had to, because nothing happens in a vacuum, he would have had to been negotiating, talking with the DNC. He would have had to have people approach him. He would have had to have people make him offers. And for all I know, they're just like, you know what? We'll give you some of what you want if you just go and run an independent because you'll actually be more useful to us by hurting Trump and not harassing Biden. Right? It now also leaves the door open for Biden to be replaced easier because imagine Biden steps down, Kamala's president, or they do some kind of primary, appoint Newsom, whatever you want to talk about. If you have a Democratic person who's currently running for president, it creates a huge news media problem that you have someone waiting in the wings in a democratic process while they're shuffling around leadership. So Kennedy almost kept Biden in office just by simply being there and not allowing Biden to just smoothly drop out. Well, now Biden can do that because he doesn't have a primary challenger, right? So if you're just thinking strategically, it is going to make him completely irrelevant, at least to the Democrats. It's going to create a problem for the Republicans. His funding should probably dry up. And now he's just a joke because anyone who runs as independent is always a joke. Every year, every 4 years, we have the same people who dream about running as independent. This time it's the time to change, blah, blah, blah. Never wins. They're always losers. And all
Yeah,
the smart
I do want to
independents.
say off that really quick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you another question here because I mean, to Kennedy's defense here, I mean, where we have to give credit where it's kind of due is I would say he is the most viral independent candidate that we've had.
Well, he's independent now,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
In my opinion, he was just as viral as Vivek. I mean, he wasn't any more viral, and Vivek was a Republican.
Yeah,
So,
I think he's going to definitely pass. I think he'll surpass Vivek. If you look at just the trajectory of his numbers and his audience reach, I think that's going to continue to scale. My question is here, for example, everybody thought there was no chance in hell Trump was going to win in 2016. Now, he definitely, I would say from a marketing perspective, obviously you can't topple Trump. You can't. Coming out on that first day and looking at Bush and just telling him he's wrong and ugly, like Ron Paul's ugly, whatever it was just eye-opening to the public. They're like, holy smokes. And so, but from RFK's standpoint, with all the chaos and conflict and corruption that has been running rampant with the massive wealth gap, if you look at the numbers and you look at the polls and you ask, your average audience in America, are you struggling? Do you feel like you're suppressed? Do you feel like your wages are not keeping up with inflation? They're going to say yes. They're going to say they're at a more scared time in history than ever, right? These are the polls. And so, from that perspective, do you think within the next year and a half, especially that we have another conflict that's only going to get worse before it gets better? We have still the Ukraine war. God forbid, China decides to pull something in Taiwan. Uh, could this be an independent moment where, okay, and I agree with you. I agree. I don't think he has a shot right now, but there's also the factor in if we're looking at the polls and where we're at today, we're in a much different position than we were in 2016 with a good stock market. Everybody believes we're going to be going into a Great Depression. No one can afford a home. We have 8% mortgage rates, right? Inflation is going to run rampant. Interest rates are going to be propped up higher than ever for a longer period of time, which is going to hurt middle class more and more. With the Federal Reserve keeping policy so tightened, by the time the election comes around next year, you're going to have millions of more of Americans hurt. So in that aspect, and this is all speculation. Obviously, anything we're doing in this is just a fun thing to talk about. With the escalation of war, with the escalation of middle class families becoming poorer and poorer and poorer, do you see a path to where it makes more like why would he do this? Why would he go independent? That's what I'm trying to ask myself because I agree with you. I think he should have stuck to the DNC, stuck up to them, and went with the Democrat. Why now? Why independent if he still doesn't have a shot at the presidency?
My guess is they made a deal on the back end, or they threatened his life. Like, hey, we want a trilogy in this, Kennedy process. Like, to me, it just doesn't make sense. But he's still transactional. I mean, if Kennedy was smart, he would have run in 2015 to primary Hillary Clinton, or he would have run in 2020 and primaried Biden, right? And then he would have been an obvious challenger, but he didn't. He's running now, of all times, right? So whoever his team is, whatever gave him in his gut, he picked a terrible time to run. And now, as an independent, we will never have an independent moment.
Either way, because didn't he get the? I mean, his focus was a lot of the things he's ran on against the CIA. He was waiting for the documents to release, and I think that was 2019, right? Was it 2019, 2020? Could have been
To me,
2020. I could be way off.
he could claim that, and maybe that's true, but he's always known that. So if that was his platform, that doesn't mean. I mean, that's possible.
Hard though, because we're dealing at a time. Everything's a conspiracy now.
Sure.
Right? Everything has fact checkers.
Yeah.
Fact checks never used to exist, and so conspiracies started becoming a little bit more true than certain people wanted to be. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm like, this also could be. And I don't know if it's this election cycle. I would fall more under the category, like you said, where it would make more sense just because of how politics work, that Biden might step down, or he does run again, gets his presidency, gets elected, steps down within 2 years. Kamala steps up. You have Gavin come in the next cycle. But we're also watching the Biden administration utterly fail at the same time as, and I actually would say this, I think MAGAs have gone too far. They have become an alt-right cult, and there's no going back. If you watch the interviews and the street interviews trying to talk to these people, there's no sense of logic. It's complete irrationality from the far right, right? Same thing with the far left. And so I mean, I guess this is optimism, as I would like to see, you know, logic fought in this next outcome, but I don't think Trump has a chance at winning the next election. I would say Biden has out of it. If it was a Biden versus Trump, Biden takes it by far. That's why you have so many candidates running against Trump.
Well, you have to remember, one, if you're independent, you use the parties as a vehicle, right? Trump was an independent. He ran twice before as an independent, made that mistake. He's like, I got to run as a Republican, right? And that's how he won. Trump is not a Republican. Trump is now a shaper, and Republican Party has completely conformed to him. But Trump was an independent who knew how to run under the Republican Party banner. If you want to make change and you don't have the traditional views, you sign up for one of the two big parties because that's your vehicle to the top. You garner the votes, you garner the interest, and that's how people get to you. That was RFK's strategy. But the DNC is very clear about, we're not opening up this democratic process. We're sticking with Biden. You're out, right? But that was his option. Going independent, like, we are never going to be, the independent party is never going to be anything, right? Because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both change through people in their wings. Like, you have a progressive caucus in the Democratic Party. So why run as a Green Party person when you already have a progressive caucus that is continuously growing more powerful within the Democratic Party? The Freedom Caucus, that is your far right, that is your libertarian-esque, pro-gun, all those typical stereotypes. They've grown in power. Matt Gaetz just kicked out the speaker. Jim Jordan, a part of the Freedom Caucus, may be the next speaker. They're both Republicans, right? That's very simple to understand. And anyone who's in politics understands that. So if you're RFK, to me, I know for a fact he understands that. So he must just be making a deal with somebody that is beneficial to him. And maybe he is stupid, and maybe he just wants to be able to say whatever he wants and siphon off money, and he'll be comfortable in death when all of the donor money doesn't get used on his campaign, and he can retire with it, right? Or use it for whatever activity he wants to use it for. But a lot of people in crypto and Web3, they make these stupid decisions on betting on losers. If you're in crypto, if you're in Web3, if you're an independent, if you want to actually have influence, you need to either donate to Biden or you need to donate to Donald Trump, right? Otherwise, you're not going to have any influence. I'm sorry. At least, like, when I'm fundraising for someone like a DeSantis, right? He's a governor of Florida. Vivek has no power, right? Vivek has no power. Nikki Haley has no power. Tim Scott's weird, but he's a senator, so I guess there you
Uh,
go.
Mike Pence does more, but still, he's utterly useless in my opinion.
Correct. Yeah. So we just got to be. That's why you got to take the emotion and who you like out. And it's like you can really dislike a lot of people, but it's like, okay, if I'm trying to accomplish a certain goal, what do I need to use for that objective? Um, and it's
I've
like,
been I've been I've been teaching a lot of people that, I mean, because you've actually shown me a lot of that, specifically on the local state in Florida. But a lot of people don't think their vote matters, and this politics is a game of risk, and you got to take it. It starts with local communities, moving that to the state, to federal, etc. But when you look at these politicians, you can completely hate a politician, but if he's got one policy or a few policies that are going to favor you and your progression on what you're trying to fight for, you use that to your advantage. This is a multi-year time frame. This is game theory, right? So if even if it's Trump versus Biden and you're a Republican, but you need a vote for Biden because it's going to benefit you more in the longer term, 4, 6, 8, 12, whatever your cycle it is. That is the outlook you have to have on it. And the same thing goes into a lot of these policies. So like for people that are pro-Trump, I don't understand that in the crypto sector. They're trying to validate themselves that, well, Trump has NFTs, so he's pro-crypto. It's like, no, he's a businessman and he has a lot of hype, and he'd have someone on his marketing team say, hey, you should launch these because you'll raise a few $1,000,000 at the snap of a finger. He's like, of course I'll fucking do that. And then I'll use my tax write-offs that all the other 1% use. There's a huge misconception too, I think people have on Trump, that he is for the people, that he's anti-establishment. And it's like, well, he uses the same establishment policies and has, clearly defrauded people in the past. And it's like, whether or not, again, we're looking at the facts, the truth here. Uh, Again, that's where you have to like separate at least the who is Biden going to appoint, which this is honestly an unfortunate scenario, which is why I'm actually bearish on regulation for crypto, because Biden's the one that appointed the SEC chair Gensler, right? Biden's the one that is,
and Janet Yellen.
and Janet Yellen, right? Who gave all of the who gave BlackRock, and who won for BlackRock against Elizabeth Warren in the lobbying in 2020 for them becoming too big to fail. And Crypto Dream, thank you for the $5, man. Much love to you, brother.
Holy shit! Yeah, thanks, boss.
We'll take some Q&A after this too, man. So appreciate you guys. So yeah, we're at this interesting outlook, and this from a crypto perspective, a Web3 policy, you'd be like, okay, I want to go with RFK because he's a pro Bitcoin candidate. He understands, and obviously everybody in crypto is like anti-establishment, anti-BlackRock, anti-SEC, right? You want this fixed, but the reality is like, is RFK that someone that can actually fix that? And the quite obvious answer is no. So, that pisses off a lot of people, and it's going to hurt their feelings. And it's just like, okay, so now if we're going to lobby, and like I actually donated to, Ron DeSantis's campaign, not from a political perspective, but from a, well, I guess it is a political perspective, but it's for me and you doing lobbying reasons and meeting down in Florida. So it's personal benefits for us, right? It's the same factor. You have to take that into Trump and Biden. So I honestly don't know where I stand on. I think honestly both of them. Trump is very pro U.S. dollar, very pro U.S. dollar. So what does that mean for crypto? You're going to have very tight regulations. So does that mean we have to go with the Biden administration? It's like, okay, well, if they have Elizabeth Warren, or sorry, if they have Janet Yellen, who's about to make some, I think, terrible mistakes with their sanctions on Russia were just so ass. Like, we don't need to go down that right now. But again, SEC Chair Gary Gensler, who is obviously using regulatory enforcement to grant himself a regulation access and control over the industry. So, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that to wrap it up with here today, but very powerful perspective to have is people need to have a more of an open mind. Don't segregate yourself to one political party. It's if you are a Republican, how to use the Democrats to your advantage. If you're a Democrat, how to use the Republicans to your advantage.
Yeah, I disagree with a few of your points. Like, I think Trump would actually be very good for crypto, and I don't hate on anyone. But you remember when we talked about like the U.S. dollar being a telecommunications network, and if it is, it's that infrastructure. Like, I think it's stupid for any president to want to be like, oh, let's get rid of the dollar because that's our number one geopolitical tool,
You
right?
think he'll flip on his crypto beliefs then?
Yeah, no, well, Trump's typical stance as being pro-business is I want to make sure America's powerful, and I want to make sure that I can grift and make money, right? Just based off those two things, I don't think he would be worse than Biden. So I really do. I think Trump would be way more friendly toward crypto than Biden. As long as Biden's in power, it's really run by Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler. And so if my only alternative is to support Trump to get those people out of power, you're rolling the dice. But
So
if the assumption is
who would he replace though? So that's where I haven't looked at
correct, so it's one of those rolling the dice things where, and this is how politics is all the time. You're like, okay, I know I hate this person. Can I figure out how to deal with the person I hate? Or do I roll the dice, get them out of there, and then just hope that the next person will be better? Either way, because there's appointed seats, the new future Gensler would still have to go through an approval process. And that's where the lobbying power could really come in and strike up a conversation, is fight some of that stuff. Or whereas before, remember, everyone thought Gensler, oh, awesome, we got the MIT professor who teaches on Bitcoin, right? And so a lot of people really weren't that worried until he was like, hey, screw you guys. I'm getting paid nice, so time to just crack down the hammer. So I can make a lot of arguments why I think Trump would be better for Web3, but overall perspective is you're always going to be rolling the dice, right? So you have to make the determination of, is who I have in power right now worth me gambling the next guy, right? So a lot of the times people get so sick of the current power that they're willing to say anything that's different is better, even if it's worse sometimes, right? That you see that in our presidential elections, right? Is people are like, that guy sucks, anybody, and then you get who we have now.
I think this is a contrarian perspective, but you might agree with this. Is so I look at the Biden administration who's been appointed, right? Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler, and they're notoriously known for losing. So, at least right now with the current people in their positions, Ripple won their lawsuit. You had Uniswap win and
Yeah.
have the judge classify, that Bitcoin and Ether commodities. Gary Gensler's got a lot of hate on Capitol Hill. So again, we should actually have a full conversation on this one in another episode and break this down. And I want to study into who Trump might be, who he might appoint, because I would like more backstory on that. But right now, what I look at it is, even though we are going to move towards the path of regulatory uncertainty, with which, and by that, I think that involves more KYC, more AML, and these certain policies. It's like at least the current chairman and Elizabeth Warren, they've been losing and they continuously lose. So I would love to break that down, because I need to do research into who could potentially be appointed or what the policies would pivot more towards. Because, like you said, that at that point you're rolling the dice, and this is just a craps table, and you have to know your odds for each political party.
Trump did appoint Hester Pierce, who's the most pro crypto person at the SEC.
Oh, okay, interesting. When he was in office, right?
When he was in office, this is in 2018. I just pulled it up to make sure. But if you had to guess, he appointed. Everybody loves Hester Pierce. No one says who appointed her, right? It was Trump who appointed her.
Interesting, because yeah, well, then he's just so anti.
He's pro US dollar, but people don't have the ability to think that, like, as an American, I'm pro US dollar. I don't want the dollar to go to crap. I enjoy the dollar being a geopolitical tool that we can use to uplift our lifestyle and be successful here and be safe. I just don't want it to be used inappropriately, which is how it's being used right now. But I also love Bitcoin.
Office needs to figure out how to control that, because the Federal Reserve controls it. Where they come in is whoever it can benefit the U.S. dollar massively if we control the stable coins.
But just because you're pro US dollar, as a president, your goal is to represent and protect the American people. And the US dollar, as you and I know, is a weapon, right? So why would I advocate to give up missile silos just because I'm pro Bitcoin? You know what I mean?
So actually, interesting point, because I'm pro U.S. dollar for sure, which is a lot of people hate that in crypto. They're like, oh, screw the U.S. dollar, stop using it. It's like, no, I think crypto is the ultimate weapon to support that, which is by forcing stable coins and reserves and even Bitcoin miners to convert into a national digital deposit or stable coin that is one-to-one backed by U.S. dollars. So you're earning the interest on it, which is why the Federal Reserve's attacking it as private money. But then again, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if the Federal Reserve is going to have control of that, obviously they're heavily tied to BlackRock, and what political parties is going to benefit? And again, what's that going to come down for the regulation and users like us? Are they going to slap on massive, fees for, why am I spacing out on the term of accredited investors, where they're like, okay, you can purchase certain assets, but you have to be an accredited investor, right? So where did those policies tie into and how those break out over the next few years? But we are over the hour mark here. So, guys, I do want to remind everybody for coming through. This is Beyond the Headlines, where we dive into your geopolitical concerns. We go into U.S. policies, and we just have the conversations with an open mind. We agree on a lot of things here, but Sam teaches me a lot of things. I hopefully teach him a lot in the crypto sector, and we just battle back and forth just on the biggest topics happening around the world. We try to keep emotions and personal opinions aside and just look at the facts and the data-driven focus and statistics. But I want to thank everybody for coming through today, guys. Make sure you smash that like button. And if we have any questions come through right now, I'm going to let Sam obviously tell you where you guys can find him. But let us know in the comments right now. We'll take some Q&A, and then we'll wrap this up here. So, Sam, thanks for having me on. Yeah, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah. No, you guys can find my YouTube channel, just Samuel Arms. Josh always links it in the chat. My TikTok, Samuel Arms. My Instagram, Samuel Arms. My Twitter, Samuel Arms. So you can go to any of those, find me. I have a link tree with all those lists. I think Joshua posted it on the last video. I'll probably post it on this one. So yeah, just click the link tree and you can follow it all.
Which I need to send you that after stream so I can put it back into the description.
Oh, true. Yeah, I can do that easy.
Sweet. Well, dude, thank you again for coming on. And guys, we'll see you guys next Friday on episode 3 of the Beyond the Headlines, guys. Thank you for watching.